do Dynamax and you do Striker Max Geyser, then Gastrodon hits the field. It's kind of null and void that turn, so you don't really want to waste those turns, and you've got to really try and figure out the 4 Pokemon that your opponent's brought before you're able to freely use the Kyogre, so it is a very difficult matchup.
It is, and heading into this second game, as Shohei looks to try and tie this up and bring it to a Game 3, it will be that double restricted lead, that Kyogre and Zacian, a lot of damage potential out on the field, and the rain on your side, going against the Charizard and the Grimmsnarl, the same lead coming out from Chuppa.
Yeah, and I mean, it worked for him so well in Game 1, it's why change things up here. I do like the Kyogre here for Shohei. It's in its more favorable condition with the rain up, of course, and it's a turn sooner this time around. And you've got the pressure there from the Zacian to take down the Grimmsnarl, nice and easy. And the Charizard's not really threatening anything too much yet. Obviously, the Zacian's going to take a lot of damage still in the rain, but you've always got the threat of this play here with the Groudon coming in to overwrite that rain.
Yeah, starting with the Kyogre as your lead, you have that immediate pressure, so you would think, but the Groudon then coming in to reset the weather means that you're going to have the final say at this stage of what the weather is going to be, and that Sun is going to perfectly enable this Gigantamax Charizard coming out.
Yeah, and now you've got, if you go for the Zacian, that's great, but then if Shohei goes for the Dynamax with the Kyogre here, he can put himself in a bit more of a better situation. You are losing your Zacian by doing this, but you can then Dynamax. We aren't seeing it, so it is just going to be a board state as we see it with this Gigantamax Charizard taking the Behemoth Blade pretty comfortably.
Yeah, it does at least bring it down under half, though, a good chunk of damage, so Shohei can try and finish it off in following turns, but a lot more damage done in return. Look at that G-Max Wildfire. No chance that the Zacian is going to be surviving that in the sun here. You're going to huge restrict it out of the way. Water Spout is going to be enough damage in the sun, though, with a critical hit to make sure that only one turn of Gigantamax is going off on Chuppa's side.
Yeah, I don't know if the critical hit mattered there. Maybe, you know, the Kyogre hadn't really taken any damage, so it was a full power. But it was in the sun, so you think maybe because you are Gigantamax, you may be able to kind of hold on just one more turn. So a big turn there for Shohei to get rid of that big threat, and you know, Chuppa's not really been able to get much more than a G-Max Wildfire out of that turn, and it gives Rillaboom, that's just ended the field for Shohei, a lot more freedom now to operate where it doesn't have to worry about that threat of the Charizard like it previously would.
Yeah, and this compares so well going into the Groudon. The one thing, though, is Shohei still doesn't really necessarily control the weather, so it's still going to make sure that the Kyogre isn't hitting as effectively as it might like to, despite the fact that it still has a lot of this HP. Now Grimmsnarl joining the field, though, it didn't set the screens last time, so this could be the opportunity to try and make sure that when Shohei gets this opportunity to Dynamax, it doesn't get to be as effective.
Yeah, and I think the one thing, if you are Shohei, you could easily switch out your Kyogre here. Maybe if you had an answer for maybe the Charizard in the back, it would be instinctively that Thundurus. So it's a good switch here, get your Thundurus in, and then you can try and get the Kyogre back onto the field and try and set your weather back up and then utilize that Dynamax.
Nice swap coming out. The Zacian's going to take the fake out as Grimmsnarl gets set up. Another Water Spout, though, and there we get to see just how little it is doing to these Pokemon in the sun, even with the critical hit on the Grimm.
Yeah, it's the sun really punishing this Kyogre here. And you know, Shohei is being very patient for when he does want to go for that Dynamax. And maybe the Kyogre isn't the thing that he's thinking about going for the Dynamax with, because he does need to try and get through these residual turns that are chipping away at his team. Right now, he does have the kind of benefit of the grassy terrain, but so does Chuppa's side of the field, you know, restoring that health a little bit every turn. But we are still yet to see the fourth Pokemon on Shohei's side, and with the Groudon in the back now, the weather control is kind of more in Chuppa's favor because the Kyogre's stuck out in the sun, so if it wants to change that, there are switches that need to be made, and it's more dangerous now in front of a Zacian that can really damage anything that does switch in that slot. You know, you can quite happily go for a Behemoth Blade. It's going to really reduce the damage of the Water Spout on the Kyogre, and then if something like that Thundurus does decide to come in, it's very risky because it potentially can pick up the knockout there.
Well, we're about to find out what is going to come out as the Kyogre will take a step back, bringing the Incineroar as the fourth and final Pokemon here for Shohei. Nice way to make sure that the Zacian with the Behemoth Blades isn't going to do as much damage as it might like to and make sure that your Kyogre does stay safe and sound. Grassy Glide into the Grimmsnarl, picking up a decent chunk of damage. It's just going to go on and keep setting up, trying to eliminate as much damage as possible from Shohei's end of the field. Now it is time for the Behemoth Blade. It already did take an attack drop, so hitting into this Rillaboom, it's going to go quite well.
Yeah, that's a nice hit, and I think, you know, Chuppa identifying the Rillaboom is going to be a bit of a threat for the Groudon when it does hit the field, but I do like the kind of change-up from Shohei here, not bringing the Thundurus, having another way to deal with the Charizard in mind, and bringing that Incineroar, which is much more useful against things like the Zacian, you know, have that Intrepid Sword, ability to get the attack boost. You can kind of nullify that with your Intimidate, and you also have the offensive pressure with your Fire and potentially Dog-type attacks, and you also benefit from the Sun as well with this Pokemon, so it's a real good tool to use and bring in this matchup, but you need to be able to get this Kyogre in if you are Shohei, and you need to get it in potentially, hopefully, after the Groudon. The problem is the Grimmsnarl as well is sitting here on the field for Chuppa, and it is able to get these screens up. The light screen that you've just seen go up, it is going to make it more difficult for Shohei to get the damage he wants onto the field. And there's also, as long as it's on the field, it's going to always provide a threat with some sort of speed control.
At least consistently hitting into the Grimmsnarl. Picking up a KO would have been a way to bring the Groudon out, so your weather bringing in the Kyogre later could have been the last, but holding on with 1 HP. Now the Behemoth Blade is going to be enough to finish off that Rillaboom. It's going to be coming down to what this Incineroar does, whether it went for the parting shot to eliminate what the Zacian could do, or just going for all-out offensive. It'll hit into the Zacian, though, dealing a lot of damage, but still also not going to pick up the KO. Now, the Spirit Break, just good for a little bit of chip.
Yeah, now this is kind of interesting because Shohei is down to his last 2 Pokemon. Obviously, we know it's the Kyogre. It's going to come in, it's going to set the rain up. But, you know, the Grimmsnarl surviving here is pretty critical for Chippa, because he has got the option where he can get the Groudon in. He can protect the Zacian the next turn if you want. The sun's up, well, the rain will be up actually, so maybe protecting the Zacian here is not the best idea, because even through Protect, is the Kyogre with its max water attack into that slot going to be enough to pick up the knockout? You would preferably like to see the Grimmsnarl go down, but this one turn is perfect because potentially with the item on the Kyogre, you know there may not be a Protect coming out there. If you do have access to something like Thunder Wave, this is a perfect time to use it, protect that Zacian, and then get your Groudon onto the field to hopefully try and close this game up for you. But you've got to contend with what we presume is going to be a Dynamax Kyogre these next 3 turns.
Yeah, that late game Dynamax can be so critical. Actually, no, instead, no Dynamax coming out, looking to try and get this spread damage move and deal enough damage going across the board. The Zacian protecting means it's only going to be hitting into the Grimmsnarl, and now it's going to be an even Pokemon count for both of these trainers. It's
a really smart play here from Shohei. You know, he's been very patient the entire game with when he is going to launch the Dynamax from his side of the field. And this, I really like this, because now he knows that the Groudon's in the back. It's going to come in, it's going to get the sun up. And rather than have to take a waste a turn of your Dynamax to revert the weather, you can just do it on your first turn of Dynamax when you come in and potentially remove the Groudon or get as close to it as possible.
Yeah, and not using the Dynamax as well. You can go for the spread damage, but you can get all 3 turns of max and actually get full impact moves, as opposed to what, the 13 HP that the Grimmsnarl had to be finishing that off. So it's interesting. The Groudon's still having a bit of health though, and it'll come down to too just how it can survive a hit in the sun.
Yeah, and you know, the Zacian's going to be able to get some considerable damage off onto the Kyogre before it does go down. And you know, if the Kyogre does decide to go to change the weather this turn, it's obviously going to weaken the Flare Blitz from that Incineroar as well. So you've got to question, is that the right thing to do here? Because if I miss the knockout on the Zacian, that's giving it potentially 2 turns to hit into my Kyogre. So you really want to try and remove that first, and then probably deal with the Groudon secondary.
Yeah, well, here it is, finally, the Dynamax, as it's 2 Pokemon on both sides. It will be that Kyogre, and looking to see just how much mileage it can put on the field. The late game Dynamax, though, and just the pressure, the double HP it's going to have definitely feels a lot better than the 1 turn of Dynamax that the Charizard had over on Chuppa's side earlier on in the game. Behemoth Blade, though, does so much damage to these Dynamax Pokemon, and we'll have to see just how effective, bringing it down to actually still over half not very effective, and Kyogre taking it very well. Precipice Blades, though, it's going to deal a lot, and it'll pick up the KO on the Incineroar.
Yeah, and the speed advantage here that the Groudon has is a big thing, but that is being counteracted now by Shohei. He is using that Max Strike to lower the speed on Chuppa's side of the field. So that Kyogre now might potentially, depending on how it's trained, get the jump onto something like the Zacian. But the problem is you've only got single target attacks now, and it feels like Kyogre's in that position where if a Behemoth Blade hits it, or if a Precipice Blades, which is now a single target attack, so an increased damage output, will be enough to pick up the knockout on the Kyogre. But if you're relying on Precipice Blades, you've got to rely on its accuracy as well, and we all know about that.
That's always the hard part of it, because that is then giving Shohei that out, knowing that, all right, if I hit into the Zacian, this Precipice Blades could very well miss, and I could just be fine. Setting up that speed control to make sure that you're good for the other turns of Dynamax, you're giving up the power that this Kyogre could have had with different moves, and instead just saying, all right, I need to get the speed, I need to be able to act first going into that. The Max Lightning to hit into the Zacian, not enough damage. And that, you needed to grab that KO. It was so important when you have these single targets. You cannot take for a second. And now it'll be a double round of attacks hitting into the Kyogre. The Behemoth Blade, we know that it wasn't doing the most damage. It won't do enough, but now the Groudon still has this opportunity to attack, but
it's
it will
a miss.
be the miss.
It misses. But like you say, I think you make a great point there where you have to, it's so essential to pick up the knockout on that Zacian this next turn, because of these single target attacks you've got, the one thing that you would want now if you're Shohei is to maybe try a max guard here, but I think because of the item that it has got on it, the Assault Vest, it doesn't have access to that Protect. I don't think it will be able to do this next turn, and that really puts him in a tough position because, like I say, if you don't pick up one, then you are going to have to target the other, you're going to have to take an attack from the other.
Quick attack from Zacian to hit into it, not enough for the KO, and finally it'll be the Max Geyser to secure the KO onto the Zacian. At this point, though, the Groudon doesn't need to go for the Precipice Blades. You can go for something a bit more accurate. Even if it doesn't deal the most damage, at least it's going to be connecting. That will be Shadow Claw in this case, and that means that Chuppa is going to remain undefeated.
What incredible set from both players. And yeah, Chuppa not wanting to take any risks there with that last turn after the initial Precipice Blades miss where his heart was in his mouth there, and I think you thinking, oh no, is this going to go to a game 3? But like you say, using that more reliable move that last turn just to secure the knockout.